Okay, let's dive into this explainer and look at an absolutely impossible underdog story. Today, we're going to trace the history of how two engineers, against all mathematical odds, built a $100 billion global empire. It's a tale of insane resilience, massive gambles, and honestly, some of the most surprising business pivots in modern history. To really understand their incredible rise, we have to start at the absolute bottom. The year is 1945, and Tokyo has literally been firebombed to ruins. Post-World War II Japan was arguably one of the most difficult places on Earth to start a business. Navy engineers Akio Morita and Masaru Ubuka had just lost their jobs due to the country's surrender. Yet, surrounded by a completely devastated city, they held on to this really powerful shared dream. They wanted to build technology that actually made people's everyday lives better. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the staggering contrast. I mean, look at this. From a bomb-damaged office building with practically zero funding, they evolved into this incredibly diverse, modern empire. Sony is completely woven into our lives today. They dominate consumer electronics, major motion pictures, the global music industry, video games, and yes, they even have an entire line of robot dogs. But how on earth did they get from a ruined storefront to the whole shebang? Well, the secret to their eventual success was, surprisingly, their early, spectacular failures. Masaru just refused to give up. His very first product, an electric rice cooker that either completely undercooked the rice or burned it to a crisp. A total failure. Next up was an electric heating blanket that was actually pretty dangerous. Another failure. But their first real breakthrough came from something so simple: fixing radios. You see, during the war, the government had cut radio wires to censor foreign news. By repairing these damaged radios, Masaru allowed people to hear foreign broadcasts again. It was a huge hit, and it officially brought Akio and Masaru together to incorporate their new company. As their ambitions grew, so did the need for a rebrand. During an early trip to the US and Germany, Akio was served a dessert with a tiny paper umbrella. The waiter playfully pointed out it was made in Japan. Well, Akio was deeply humiliated by this realization that made in Japan was treated as a global joke for cheap, low-quality goods. He made it his absolute mission to create a highly respected global brand. So, flipping through a dictionary, they combined Sonos, the Latin word for sound, with Sony, which was slang for a young man. And just like that, the Sony brand was born. So, the crucial point is, this massive ambition came with a near-fatal hurdle: 95%. Sony had boldly secured the licensing to use American transistor technology to make portable radios. They essentially bet the entire company's future on this. But when they started mass production, a devastating 95% of the transistors were defective. They were bleeding money, forced to take out bank loans just to survive. They were quite literally on the brink of death. But through sheer persistence, they finally perfected the manufacturing. This led to the TR-63, proudly marketed as the world's first pocket-sized transistor radio. But here is a brilliant and honestly hilarious historical anecdote for you. The radio was actually slightly too big to fit into standard shirt pockets, so what did Sony do? They sneakily manufactured custom shirts with extra large pockets for their salesmen. During sales demos, the reps could effortlessly slide the radio into their oversized pockets, proving it was indeed pocket-sized. The product was an absolute smash hit. As Sony expanded, Masaru turned his intense focus to color televisions. Early color TVs were dim, blurry, and just plagued with visual defects. Instead of just tweaking the existing flawed technology, Masaru's relentless drive pushed his team to completely reimagine how a color TV worked. They engineered a brand new system from absolute scratch. This resulted in the Trinitron. It was vastly superior, brighter, and sharper. It went on to sell roughly 290 million units, and even won Sony an Emmy Award for its contribution to television. It's a classic lesson in innovation. Sometimes you shouldn't just patch up a broken system, you need to start completely over. But, being technically superior doesn't always guarantee a win. In the 1970s, Sony invented the video cassette recorder with Betamax. It was incredible technology, but they soon faced a devastating format war against a rival format called VHS. While Betamax had vastly superior image quality, they lost everything in this war. Why? Simply because VHS was cheaper and could store 4 times as much content for the average consumer. Millions of dollars invested in Betamax were completely lost. It's a really harsh reality check. For the average person, convenience and price will almost always beat out perfect specs. Reeling from that massive financial loss, Akio Morita pitched a wild new idea, a portable cassette player for music, complete with headphones. The industry thought it was incredibly foolish. At the time, wearing headphones in public carried a real cultural stigma around deafness and was considered somewhat shameful in Japan. Facing intense doubt from his own team, Akio laid down this dramatic, audacious ultimatum. If it doesn't sell 30,000 units, I will quit. And this brilliantly illustrates the payoff for trusting those visionary instincts. 385 million. That is how many units the Sony Walkman eventually sold. It completely revolutionized the way the world consumed portable music. Suddenly, taking your favorite songs with you everywhere wasn't shameful at all. It was the ultimate cultural status symbol. But Sony wasn't done disrupting music, not by a long shot. They embarked on a massive 14-year gamble, partnering with Philips to invent the completely digital compact disc, or CD. To pay off this huge investment, Sony masterminded a brilliant, self-sustaining snowball effect. First, their own factory-produced CDs. Second, they collected royalties when other companies made CDs. Third, they sold the actual hardware, the CD players. And fourth, their own newly acquired record labels sold the music that went onto the CDs. Every single step of this interconnected process fed directly into the others, generating mountains of cash. With overflowing coffers from the CD boom, Sony decided to invade an entirely new industry: video games. They started off with what seemed like a highly promising working relationship with Nintendo. In fact, Sony was actually responsible for building the highly successful audio system inside the legendary Super Nintendo console. Because of this relationship, Sony pitched Nintendo a brilliant idea: an external add-on that would let the Super Nintendo play large, CD-based games instead of just limited cartridges. But as development began, heavy tensions started building up. Nintendo grew incredibly paranoid. They feared that if game developers got used to Sony's CD technology, Sony might just launch their own console and steal all the developers away. So to prevent this, Nintendo made a shocking move. Who do you think they unexpectedly partnered with instead? Philips. Yeah, in an act of ultimate ironic betrayal, Nintendo publicly stabbed Sony in the back by announcing they were dropping Sony and building their CD add-on with Philips instead. Yes, the exact same company that Sony had co-invented the CD with in the first place. As you can imagine, the executives at Sony were absolutely furious. But this betrayal was arguably Nintendo's worst historical mistake, because they inadvertently created their own worst nightmare. Sony channeled that fury into releasing their own console, the PlayStation. In the ensuing console war, Nintendo stubbornly stuck to cartridges for the N64, resulting in a library of about 400 games. Because the PlayStation used CDs, it offered vastly superior storage resources for developers, leading to a massive library of nearly 8,000 games. Sony totally crushed it, selling over 100 million units. Let's move to and see how this builds into their next big leap. This massive success in gaming helped Sony realize a foundational business truth: owning intellectual property is king. You don't just want to make the hardware, you want to own the characters and the stories themselves. So turning their eyes to Hollywood, Sony bought the massive movie studio Columbia Pictures Entertainment in 1989, officially entering the film business. Which leads us to one of the most unbelievable discounts in corporate history. Back in 1998, Marvel Comics was recovering from a brutal bankruptcy and desperately needed cash. Sony Pictures approached them to buy the film rights to their most popular character, Spider-Man. Because of Marvel's sheer desperation, Sony secured the rights for a measly $7 million, plus a minor $10 million per movie and a 5% cut of the box office. Now let's immediately contrast that $7 million price tag with what it became: $9 billion. That is the staggering, compounding, long-term value the Spider-Man film franchise has generated for Sony Pictures over the years. And the deal stated that as long as Sony makes a Spider-Man movie every 5 years and 9 months, they keep the exclusive rights forever. It's for sure one of the most profitable bets they've ever made. But prepare yourself for this jaw-dropping fact. During those initial negotiations, Marvel actually offered to sell Sony the film rights to their entire character roster: Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, everyone, for just $25 million. But Sony executives flat out refused the offer. Why? Because they wrongly assumed that nobody cared about the other Marvel characters, so they only bought Spider-Man. Imagine owning the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe for $25 million. No way. Fast forward to the modern era, where ruling a global media empire comes with unprecedented digital hurdles. In 2014, Sony Pictures was the victim of a brutal, historic hack by a group calling themselves the Guardians of Peace. The hackers stole terabytes of confidential data and left ominous threats on employee computer screens. The fallout was sheer corporate chaos. The hackers leaked the personal info of employees, completely wiped parts of Sony's digital infrastructure, and leaked highly embarrassing confidential emails. In one infamous email, a top Sony executive was caught calling actress Angelina Jolie a minimally talented, spoiled brat. Yikes. The hack was largely linked to Sony's comedy film, The Interview, which mocked the leader of North Korea. In fact, the FBI formally blamed North Korea for the cyber attack, though it's worth noting some cybersecurity experts remain a bit skeptical of that conclusion. Yet through devastating hardware failures, format wars, betrayals, and massive cyber attacks, Sony survives because of their incredible ability to absorb failure, adapt, and accept criticism. This is perfectly illustrated by one of their ultimate corporate moves. Early on, the founders literally hired one of their most vocal, harsh critics to help improve their product line. That willingness to listen to harsh feedback really paid off. That critic eventually worked his way up to become the president of Sony. It's a powerful reminder. Sometimes your harshest critics are the exact people you need to build a better future. Today, the company that started repairing damaged radios in a firebombed storefront continues to fearlessly invade completely unexpected industries. Sony is no longer just electronics and entertainment. They have boldly expanded their horizons into life insurance, banking, biotechnology, robotics, and they're even stepping into the world of electric cars. Which leaves us with this incredible thought to ponder. From a failed rice cooker in 1945 to literally taking over the world across a dozen different industries, what impossible pivot will Sony make next? Their story proves that absolute resilience, an open ear to criticism, and a willingness to take massive, calculated risks are the true secrets to building an empire. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes on the horizon for whatever impossible thing comes next.